She's telling me we'll be wed. She's picked out a king-size bed. Oh, ain't love a kick? Tell me quick, ain't love a kick in the head?
Ahead and convene our planning committee meeting. And the first item on our agenda today is the mobile home park quality of life issue, which Councilmember James brought to the committee. And it's coming back to us after being discussed last month at our planning committee meeting. So, Councilmember James, do you have any initial comment before we start discussing this, which is on pages 1 through 3?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to comment that the title of the agenda item was a bit misleading, and some folks thought it was the report out of the finality of the quality of life for mobile home park, and this is actually the relocation assistance issue specifically. So for those watching and for further reference for anyone that wants to follow up on this later at the council meeting report out, which will be next Tuesday, please indicate that this is, or please note that this is for the relocation assistance and not for the full mobile home park report out. Thank you.
Did you have any comment about what was brought back to us in terms of the ordinance, or does any other council member want to comment on the ordinance change?
I would like to say that I believe, and Keith Horn and Shel Talbert, as well as Paula King are here, and I would like to say that I believe they did make the changes that were brought forward, that were suggested at the last committee meeting, and they are here for your reference if you need to ask any questions.
Perhaps we should hear from you all first. Keith Horn from Law. Thank you for being here.
I attempted to make the change that I think was discussed, which was the beginning language just now indicates that just to ensure that the program remains viable and is regularly funded, that it's the intent, or it's recommended that the Urban County government appropriate annually $50,000 to this program. After talking to budgeting and accounting, I also added a sentence about this being maintained as an open fund, which was explained to me that would mean that the money would not have to be reappropriated every year, that would remain an open fund. That's my understanding of it. So that's the only changes to the ordinance.
Okay, so that was on page 3 of the packet in this last section 5-107, where I highlighted the part of the sentence. It is recommended that the LFUCG appropriate at least $50,000 annually to the program. And was there any other
After
change?
the next sentence, any funds appropriated, that next sentence is new. The funds for the program shall be maintained as an open fund.
Now, are you saying that would be added? Oh, okay, I see. Skip the one sentence. The fund for the program shall be maintained as an open fund, and then that defines it so that nothing has to be reappropriated. It stays in that fund and is available for use whenever it's needed.
In subsequent fiscal years.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Cheryl, did you have any comment or?
No, I was just here to support you.
You're supporting. Paula King, did you want to say anything? Okay, you have some good support here. You come with good backup. Okay, we'll open it to council member questions, and I have Dr. Stevens.
I guess I don't have a question, but I'm a little uncomfortable with the fiscal recommendations, because I think that we have many needs in our city and in our community for funds, and that to separate one particular program out and have a dedicated funding for it, which would stay in the fund subsequent years without having a obligation like we do now. If you obligate a fund now, or a purchase order, say, and it goes through, it can carry over to the next budget year. This would be a little different. And I noticed that you used the words recommend. Does that mean that it's permissive then? It's not shall, it's a maybe.
That's correct.
And the whole thing would be a maybe then?
Yes.
That the fact that there would be funds accumulating which may not be used, that would carry over to the next year would also be maybe?
Once you make an appropriation to that fund, unless you come back in to amend this, it will remain in that fund for this purpose, unless you reach that $200,000 level, at which point the council has the ability to, for any amount over that, to reappropriate to other programs or services. But this does not tie you down to making the appropriation annually, the $50,000 appropriation. And let me say that I'm trying to make this reflect what the council wants. I'm not necessarily here to advocate that this is what should happen. I took what happened at the last meeting and tried to build into the ordinance what I had heard.
Well, I would object and register an objection to this. I don't think that it should be any different than any other appropriation that we make during the course of our budget preparation and approval. I think that it is an excellent program. It certainly is needed and needs to be adequately funded, but I think we can compete along with any other request.
Does that complete your comments?
Yeah, I would strike it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. Councilmember James and then Councilmember Beard.
I guess I'm deferring back to Keith, and where you say that you're responding to what the committee felt like was necessary. The group that worked on this, did you all feel, I mean, you were the ones charged with kind of researching this and putting this together. Did you feel that it was important to do this sort of appropriation specifically for this fund?
I don't necessarily want to speak for everybody, but yes. I think that one of the major concerns about the program is it's somewhat useless to create a program and then not make sure that there are funds in it for the operation of the program. Mm-hmm. If you create this and don't make the appropriation, then basically you don't have a relocation assistance program, even though there may be an ordinance on the books. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and it wasn't just our intergovernmental group, it was the build folk as well, and the commitment that the administration made to bring forward to the council an ordinance that would be viable and effective, mm-hmm. not just a useless ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Would there be a way to put some type of time on this particular one to where we could say, evaluated after that this needs to come up 5 years from now? I don't know if you can create an ordinance that says this either needs to be evaluated or it's done with in 5 years. Can you do that?
I think we can build that into the ordinance if that's what you prefer. As I said before, at any moment, the council could examine this ordinance and decide to amend any part of it or to do away.
Through our regular legislative process?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I would definitely urge the committee to support this. I do support this in the current language. Some of the confusion that had been expressed previously is, doesn't adult services already get money to do things like this? And it's clear that there's some misunderstanding about the funds that we already have for assistance and whether they would be able to be used for this particular type of situation. So I think it's definite that we need the specificity that's included in this. I would support, if there's some uncomfortableness with this being in some kind of perpetuity, I would support an end date to go back and look at. But I do suggest that it's going to be my motion towards the end of this to go ahead and move this out of this committee today to put forward to the full council. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I basically agree with Councilmember James as to the need and requirement for this. It's kind of uncharted waters, and it was brought about by the Ingleside Trailer Park situation. And we don't have one of those happen to us every year, every quarter, maybe every 4 or 5 years. We just are kind of flying by the seat of our pants as to what is adequate. $200,000 in some circumstances might not be adequate. And we always have the ability, if in fact we're able to build some kind of a reliable track record and feel more comfortable with the amount, we can always go back in and change it as a council. So, I would recommend just keeping it as it is and go from there. Thank you.
Keith, could I ask you, what would be, in your view, what is the difference on this Section 5-107 if we said, in order to ensure that the relocation assistance program for tenants remains viable, it needs to be regularly funded, taking out the next part? Because a recommendation, any council can do anything they want with the budget.
As a practical matter, there is no legal difference in that language. I think that part of the reason why a figure was built in was to send the message that there is seriousness about funding it and at what level. But if you want to make that change, there's technically no difference.
Well, I was just curious, do we have any other ordinance where we recommend a funding level? Other than, I know we have a very special ordinance with our rainy day fund, our economic contingency, but
I'm not aware of any. I can't promise you there aren't any because I haven't looked at everything, but I'm not aware of any like this.
Any other council comment?
Mr. Blues.
Oh, Dr. Blues?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my concern, too, whether in an ordinance we recommend that something be done. My general understanding is, is that we say what is being done. It would seem to me that we would. It would be appropriate to say not that we recommend X amount, but that we strike that and go on to the next sentence. That the funds appropriated to the fund remain available, to it. In other words, it might be, let me ask this, if we worded it, and Keith, you may provide some guidance here, in order to ensure that the relocation assistance fund for tenants remains viable, comma, any funds appropriated to the program, et cetera.
There's no reason why it couldn't read that way if that's what you would like.
I would move then, Madam Chair, to amend the wording as I just read it.
Okay, there's a motion. Do I hear a second?
I second it, but would you repeat your motion again for me? I think
Yes.
I got it, but I'm not sure.
That the first sentence would be alighted with the second one in the following way. In order to ensure that the relocation assistance program for tenants remains viable, comma, any funds appropriated to the program shall remain available to the program in subsequent fiscal years.
And would you say any unused funds? What we're talking about is if say they have an appropriation of $50,000 and they use 40,000, that 10,000 would stay with them.
Yes, if you think that the word unused should be there.
I think that's what, I think it would describe more what the intent is.
I take that as a friendly addition.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And so if you want to speak to the motion, I know some people were on the list first. Just let me know. Councilmember James, go ahead.
I understand where the concern is, and relative to all of the other line items that we've already appropriated for this budget year, it makes sense that there is some hesitancy to establish a particular amount. But just as Keith said, this is a new program. I don't know how many new programs that we've started in the middle of a fiscal year, or when we're not looking at it for the full with the full budget. So I think the dollar amount is to show the integrity of the intent, but it's also to kind of give an idea. If this program, say all of us were replaced on council by chance, we're not all going to be replaced. A lot of us are going to still be here. But if all of us were replaced and someone brand new was looking at this budget, looking at the budget where this program was part of that budget, how would they know what the intent was of this program? How would they know how much would be? And as I'm talking, I'm kind of sorting this out, so please bear with me. But I'm thinking we've got to have some type of reference, and whether that is to go that we designate, the language needs to be there that, Department of Social Services or Adult Services or someone needs to help guide what's the appropriate index. What are we looking for in order to really make a mark in this particular program? Because it's not necessarily holistically as all government programs. It's this specific program encountering this issue and being able to meet that mark. So is it going to be, as we go line item by line item, oh, we've got $10,000 left, so we're going to put it over here in the relocation assistance program? Well, $10,000 is not going to do anything towards dealing with this tenant issue that doesn't have any money appropriated to it right now. There's nothing, we're starting from nothing. So we've got to have some sort of benchmark. And I think I have in my mind now $50,000. So when I'm going to have budget discussion, if I'm on that link, that's what I'm going to put out there for debate. But anybody else wouldn't even know where to start or what kind of goal we're aiming towards. So I think it's important to have that dollar amount listed. And I cannot support the motion. Thank you.
Dr. Stevens, you're next.
What has been the history of this fund in the past? Do you know how much you've used in past years?
There isn't a fund for this. The history that you may be speaking to is our relocation assistance program that's for condemnations, where code enforcement has gone out, taken an action, and condemned a property. But that's not what this ordinance speaks to, so there is no history to speak of. Now, with code enforcement properties, it just depends. A couple of years ago, in September, we had run out of funds because there was a whole apartment complex that had been condemned. We had $15,000, and based on that, we asked for an additional $15,000. So last year, we had $30,000, and we used all of that money as well.
And that covered your needs for last year?
Did it cover our needs for last year? We overspent by a couple $1,000s.
How about previous years?
That's what before that, we had $15,000. There was an apartment complex that was condemned based on a flooding that had happened. We used all our money in September. The budget started in July. By September, we used all of our funds because of that one particular action. So it just depends on, natural disasters, something's going on in the community. But, we never had a problem spending the money that's been allocated for condemnations. Again, there's no history with this program based on the individuals that we were working with Ingleside. Because there wasn't money set aside for that, we tried to piece together what we could in the community, but there would have definitely been a need for the money there, and we probably could have used $20,000, $30,000 at that point based on the number of residents. So that's the other thing that you're going to have to look at too. How many households are going to be affected by that? Again, we don't know.
Well, I have no objection to creating a line item in the budget for this particular program, as you describe a new program, but I'm opposed to setting an amount on it now and making it a recurrent thing codified in the ordinances. I think that the Department of Social Services can put this in their budget request, and it can compete with other things in their department as well as the government as a whole. I see no reason to that this program is so different than any other program that it needs to be codified in the Code of Ordinance with a set amount. So I support the motion, and if it wouldn't pass, I'll make a motion we delete this whole thing, this whole paragraph, I mean, related to its special provisions.
Dr. Blues?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree on this point because it does seem to me that that we determine policy in making a budget and so on. Our ordinances are the expression of that of that policy. We do have a preamble here which expresses the need. We do have a Department of Social Services which is mandated to look at the needs. I would expect that as we move toward discussions for the 2010 budget, that social services will be advocates for this, that various members of the council will be advocates. So we set the law in the ordinance. We make recommendations, in other venues. So I think that not putting a recommended amount is no detriment to to the intention or to the expression. Thank you.
Councilmember Beard?
Thank you again, Madam Chairman. I guess I'm going to have to be take a position somewhat contrary to Councilmember Stevens and Blues. Again, we're in uncharted waters here, and this would be likened to not budgeting in the police department for gasoline because we don't know what the price of gasoline is going to be, and are budgeting a fixed amount, and then gasoline goes to $4.11 a gallon, and we park all the vehicles sometime in January, February, and they don't run. We have to put a number in there, I think, to show what our intention is and our level of interest in doing this, rather than leaving it open-ended. Because if we do not have one of these circumstances for a year or two, the natural tendency is going to be to forget about it altogether, and the council to forget about it altogether. And then we have to go through some long, drawn-out process to remind them about what happened at Ingleside and what did happen. And we're not giving this money away. It's there for the purposes of helping people who are in dire straits in a situation beyond their control. And again, we have control of how high that number can go. If, in fact, and let's take a 10-year horizon, that it sticks close to 200,000, we could always lower that number down because we wouldn't have had any single occurrence. It would have maybe been any higher than $40,000, $50,000. Any future councils will have the option to do that, but I think we have to be able to communicate to future councils what our intent was to begin with. And if we just strike that whole paragraph, we might as well not even have the program as far as I can see. Thank you.
Councilmember McCord tried to use his electronic and didn't show up, so you're next.
I guess for the sake of going forward, is there anything that's showing up on your all's radar that there's another one of these coming, or it's kind of in the potential site at least? You know, and that's, I guess that's my dilemma, because you see that there's a real need when it does happen, but then putting money away and leaving it untouched for something that, you know, is, you don't even see anything on the radar right now. And I think this kind of goes back to a couple years ago when some council members basically voiced their concern to the Commissioner of Social Services and asked, what's coming next? Kind of what's the Katrina that's coming? And the premise of that was that, you know, FEMA got blasted because they weren't in place, ready to go when something that they knew was going to happen happened. And I think that where I kind of come down on this is putting something that gives some intentionality of, yes, we recognize this can happen, and it can happen very quickly, but I think more to having the Commissioner of Social Services and us working very closely together, seeing what's coming up, the planning department and them talking, versus trying to put a set of money away, keeping that sequestered over here, and then letting that build, and then we got another need that we could apply that to.
Well, planning is in the process, and they were working on changing their application so that we would know.
Okay.
They were asking very specific questions when people came in to submit applications if something like this was going to happen. So for us to say, do we know, I don't think we have a process in place to know if it's going to happen. But that was one of the things that planning was working on.
And I think that's probably can be the most beneficial thing to come out of this meeting, however things are voted, is to have planning, the planning department basically identify the known trailer parks that we have in the city, and then put them on.
We worked through all that during our process. We sat down and looked at the ones that were zoned for trailer park use and if they were zoned for something else. So planning, building inspection, the players at the table were very involved, and it was an excellent work group. So, and I think we did come up with some things that we could put in place so that we would know.
Madam Chair, would it be appropriate if we had asked planning to just give us give the planning committee a quarterly report of what those are, if there's any movement, that way there's a trigger, at least for this body, to be aware, however this vote goes down. I think that it would be good for those parties that are actively at the table to just supply us with, here's where they are, here's what is happening around, or here's what might be happening in the next year. So I can make that in the form of a motion that the planning department would bring us a quarterly report of that.
Can you hold off until the current motion is debated and voted?
Sure.
I do want to make sure that everyone understands this applies to more than mobile home parks. Mm-hmm. It's related to the dislocation of low-income tenants. Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that the existing mobile home parks, there may be one or two that wouldn't even have to request a zone change to go ahead and change its use, that the existing zoning would permit, I think, industrial or something like that in its current location. So it's not necessarily always going to be triggered by the Division of Planning. It could be triggered by something else.
Okay. Councilmember James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to talk a little bit about, we talked about the accrual and whether the funds would be utilized or not. And I think as long as our urban service boundary is as it is, the need to develop within the urban service area will be there. And if, Councilmember McCord, if you need some examples of where it's happening, I can take you for a ride through my district. It is a threat. It's not even a threat, it's a promise that these funds will be needed. It happened as kind of, we found out the information after the fact, or during the phasing of the Ingleside Mobile Home Park, and didn't have anything in place to help those residents. And there were many of us, Cheryl and I, and many others, frantically trying to figure out what to do and trying to be proactive. I'm finding is very difficult in this government sometimes because everybody wants it to be the same as it always is. Yet we talk about innovation and progressiveness when we talk about planning for the future. We really need to plan for the future. And it's not just mobile home parks. Infill and redevelopment is occurring right now as we are speaking. There's bulldozers happening. People, maybe not always residents, sometimes it's other, we haven't got anything in place yet for the business owners that are dislocated. But infill and redevelopment happens all the time. It's happening as long as our urban service boundary is the way that it is, and will continue to happen. So keep in mind that if 1 year something's not tapped into, that next year we might get hit double fold or triple fold and need all of those additional funds. It's not like gas to where we can go to a hybrid system. You talked about the comparison to gas, Councilmember Beard, and that was a great comparison. But there's solutions to that to make it to where we don't have to rely on that. And when we go through our budget and we're going line item by line item, we're looking at things that can potentially be eliminated at some point. You have a program that maybe will work its way out. When we're giving money to partner agencies, we're looking at them having a mission and solving a purpose. Relocation, as long as our infill is happening at the level that it's happening, will be needed. We need to be proactive. We need to stand up and be that council that we talked about being. Proactive and progressive and really being there for our citizens and having something in place. We need to keep that dollar amount in there. Thank you.
Councilmember Stinnett.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly think this ordinance and what's been presented to us today and the work of the work group is being proactive. I think the language in there specifies exactly what type of assistance this government will provide. I think as we should, we focused on the money aspect today a little bit more than the actual need for the program. I think the program is great as it's set up, but I think from the money aspect, I guess my biggest question is, have you ever spent or had the need for $50,000 a year prior to today?
For
assistance, rental assistance, for this type of assistance. You mentioned $30,000 last year.
that was for relocation. Now, keep in mind that we have another set of money that's emergency financial assistance when people have lost their income for one reason or another, whether they're sick, their job, they've been laid off. Yes, we do spend over $50,000 for rental assistance in that particular program. But that's based on a specific need because something has happened to them that they're not able to generate income that they would normally generate. This ordinance isn't about that.
So the $30,000 was relocation money last year?
Yes.
And then you said you spent an additional $2,000 over that. Where did you get the additional $2,000?
We have to go back and forth within our budget. We have to borrow from the Emergency Financial Assistance Fund to move the money over to
So budget amendments or normal process. Well, and that gets me to the point, I don't mind this council saying, hey, we need to put $50,000 a year into this program. No problems at all about that. But if the money's not spent or you only spend 30, I think that
That's
20.
all we had.
Right. Or if you only spend 40 of this 50, then I'm not exactly comfortable with that rolling over to the next fiscal year because I think if there is a need, if you do come back to us and say, we have 50,000 in, but we need 100,000 this year, I think the process is in place that you can do a budget amendment or come to this council. Have you ever come to the council for additional funds in your area for any type of social service program?
I haven't.
I mean, we did it as a council for the CHIP program. For instance, we had extra funds in the fund balance and we created a CHIP program. It's a program that provides the heating assistance, but we don't put money into it every year until, A, we have a budget surplus or there's a need and they come to us for that need. I think that may be better suited for this program because we can't judge the need every year. I mean, we've debated that. But I think the program needs to be in place. There needs to be some type of dollars allocated each year, but whether or not it needs to roll over, I'm not exactly comfortable with it rolling over every year and building up to $200,000. That's a big chunk of change. I think if we're ever going to need that kind of money, I think I have the confidence in Commissioner Helm and yourself to come to us and say, hey, council, we need a budget amendment. We need to take from our emergency rainy day fund. We need to fix this. But having the policy in place allows you the capability to come to us and ask for those monies. Thank you.
Councilmember Beard, we still have the motion we're discussing to remove the one phrase it is recommended that the LFUCG appropriate at least $50,000 annually to the program. So, Councilmember Beard.
Thank you again. Cheryl, you mentioned you had a fire situation in an apartment and you ran out of money at that point. What was the process of the residents themselves? Did they have to race down here and get in ahead of somebody else to, or did you prorate it across the whole group or how?
No, I mean, the people come in as they come in. I mean, it's.
Then they do have to race they do have to,
But
once
they
they.
don't, Yeah. But they don't sense that, I mean, we've never told them we don't have any money, because my thought is this is a service that we're offering to the community. We need to be able to assist them. So for them to know we got $999 left, the community doesn't know that. The clients that are coming in don't know that.
But y'all had in your budget $15,000.
We had in our budget $15,000.
Okay, and so that wasn't adequate.
That was not
I'm
adequate.
talking about philosophically now, we're in a situation where we have to raise that to replicate in the future what has happened in the past. But these events don't happen with enough regularity. And obviously, let's use apartments. They're all different sizes with all different numbers of tenants. So to be able to predetermine what that amount should be each year is going to be a problem. Do we not also, and I'll just ask this in general, do we not also have other funds that overflow each year and we carry that money forward? Like the sewer fund? Yeah. I mean, so it's not unprecedented to carry.
There are dedicated funds, and I believe the grant program funds flow over into the following year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're not in uncharted waters by suggesting this then at this point. And maybe $200,000 isn't necessarily need to be the number. Maybe it's $100,000, but at the same time, it needs to be something, I think, in my opinion, anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Blues?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The issue here is not $200,000 or any other number. The issue here is crafting an ordinance that makes a recommendation. I'm all in favor of Councilmember James's argument that we need to fund this kind of assistance. It's not an argument, however, that you make in an ordinance. You make it at budget hearings, in other fora where we're actually determining how much to put into a fund that's been defined in this ordinance if this ordinance passes. So that's, I think, is the issue that we're addressing with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Will you temporarily take the chair, please?
Be happy to take the chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Blues.
Does anybody wish to be recognized?
I had a couple of questions for you, Keith. We were talking about, are there other funds that get rollover in the general fund? Do you know of any fund that rolls over? Because I don't think of one in the general fund, which this would be general fund, right?
Correct.
Well, other than the economic contingency fund. But all the funds where things are rolled over, other than capital, are special enterprise funds, are they not? Sanitary sewer
I think
fund,
that's probably
landfill
true.
fund.
Yeah, I may not be the person to ask versus someone
Well,
from
yes, you are
budgeting,
law, that's true.
but that would be my understanding.
I think that is true. And I really appreciated what Councilmember Blues said, because I'm totally in favor of this ordinance. I think we need to put a plan in place. Because if we don't have a plan in place, then we have no backbone for putting funds into it. I do differ, and I agree with Councilmember Blues in that this, just like every other general fund allocation, should go through the budget discussions. We do not mandate how much money we put for stormwater, which is a huge issue. We don't mandate how much money we put for resurfacing. We let those come through the budget process. So that's my only my only difficulty with this is this one phrase that recommends an amount of money annually. I think that's up to the divisions and the departments to bring that forward through the process we have on the books. I fully support the rest of this, which the intent, I believe, is to set up a program where we can help folks who need help. But I will support your motion because I think it's inappropriate to designate or even recommend an amount of money. If we're going to start doing that, I'd like to see us recommend money for PDR. I'd like to see us recommend money for stormwater. I'd like to see us recommend money for resurfacing. I mean, you can go down the list of general fund needs, and all of those could have a recommendation behind them through ordinance. So I will support your motion and intending to support the rest of the ordinance because I think it is a good, strong ordinance to set up a program for what we want to do.
Can I make sure there's no confusion about one thing?
Okay.
This ordinance is not written to apply to those condemnation situations.
Right.
That's a
Yes.
separate program, and so there's technically no historical event to compare this to
Yes.
for the purpose it's written. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood this does not apply to condemnation.
Right. Those are the situations where you've
Right.
put money in.
And I would just
Different
ask
way.
to make a comment is that if we're going to go that route and it has to be that it's going to be part of the budgeting process, just to keep in mind that not to take away from another program, one of our existing programs to be able to fund this. So not to lower our emergency financial assistance budget to be able to fund this program, but in addition to what we request, to be able to request the amount.
Well, my understanding is this would be a new program,
Right.
and the monies requested come from social services. So that would need to be worked out through the budget process. And, I mean, at some point, I think during this year, if we put this into place, we theoretically could put some seed money into it, if we figure out where to take that seed money from. But, my only point was that philosophically, I disagree with putting a recommended amount in an ordinance for a general fund program where all the others have to come through the regular process as a budget request and then work through the mayor, work through the council. So that was my only, that is really my only differ on this, and so I'm going to support your motion.
I now return the chair.
Thank you,
Madam
Dr.
Chair.
Blues. Now we have Councilmember Gray and Councilmember James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was curious as to you all may have addressed this, I apologize for being tardy. Did the social services recommend the 50,000? Was that the work group?
Can the work group,
did? Yeah.
can you?
Okay.
Yes, the work group. And the motion on the floor is to remove that phrase, it is
Right.
recommended that the LFUCG appropriate at least 50,000 annually to the program.
So the recommendation was for 50,000. Would it be, and I'm hearing the comments and in terms of the point of view of the appropriateness of a number in the ordinance, and that's pretty compelling. The question that I would have would be, would it be appropriate to recommend, consistent with the work group, perhaps 50,000 for the first year? Have you all discussed that? Did you already mention, is that?
The motion on the floor, I don't think we've discussed that, but are you asking to put that in ordinance or to bring it as a recommendation separately from the ordinance?
I don't know exactly.
Okay, all right.
I'm just throwing it out as encouraging an endorsement of somehow to encourage the endorsement of the 50,000 that's been recommended, but not make it binding, because the issue of bindingness is a compelling one to me. the one that you all have been discussing. But it's also worthwhile to acknowledge the intentions of the work group and what they've vetted. You know, I think that maybe is consistent with what Councilmember Beard was suggesting too, that, you know, they've worked through this, so there's a level of investment in it, those numbers, and if there's a way that we can recognize that without codifying it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Councilmember
Chair.
James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify a statement, Madam Chair, that you just made to Cheryl, which was social services would, since it's their program, they would have to come up with the funding. And I just wanted to request okay, because I wanted to clarify, because it sounded like it would be out of the social services budget, but it's out of the general fund dollars. So, but my concern is, during our link discussions, when we had our link, we had kind of an amount, and money was tight, and we had an amount for the divisions of government that we were linking with, and we were trying to work with the dollar amounts given, and that was based on existing programs. And I guess, as a matter of fact, I don't even know if we even funded any new or expanded programs at all. So I'm curious if funding doesn't come down from Mayor's proposed budget, and we're in tough economic straits again, and social services has to add this new program, which really affects more divisions of government than just social services. It's really planning has been involved, Mayor's office has been involved. Then they'll need to kind of finagle with their budget and make it happen with what they're handed down. Or I guess, kind of going back on what Cheryl's saying, is this seems to really be a need, but they already have needs, and they use their money on all the existing programs. And again, we've had a couple of comments about the mix-up between the emergency funding and this funding. A couple of council members have said that, and I'm just afraid the language is going to just get really blurry, and it's going to say, okay, we have $50,000 to use for tenant assistance, let's just divide it, 25,000 and 25,000. That doesn't really seem to help what the issue is of this ordinance.
Well, why I said what I did is I was thinking along the lines of Vice Mayor Gray, that if we could find some seed money for this program to seed it initially without putting in the ordinance that there's a recommended amount every year, because whether it's housed in social services or whether it's housed in planning or wherever it's housed, I'm kind of taking a budget purist view in that all programs have to make their request every year for dollars. So if we could somehow seed it first, which I think is what you were getting to, Vice Mayor, is put some initial money into it to set it up without putting in the ordinance how much money had to be in there every year. That's kind of where I'm coming from. But it would need to be requested every year then. It would compete with everything in government in the general fund.
And I guess I just need some help with the comparison to PDR and road resurfacing, because PDR has a set goal and a set amount and a set goal, and road surfacing, we know we can, for $800,000 we can do 2 roads or whatever the amount is. For this is kind of, we don't know how many tenants are going to be relocated or not. How would they know how many people to estimate for the way that we do with PDR and the way that we do with road surfacing? How would we know?
Now, I don't believe we put in ordinance how much goes into road resurfacing and how much goes into PDR, do we?
I think
No,
That's
but we
all
know,
in the budget process.
right? But we know when we get that handed down, we know how many roads, how many roads are there. We know the goal of PDR. There's a certain goal and matching funds and all that go into that. I'm just maybe I would support the $50,000 initial
Seed money.
Again, I'm worried about after the next budget year. How would we then account for that mega year where all the mobile home parks are closed in 1 year?
Or, well, I think we can go either way on that. That may never happen, but it may happen. We don't know. I mean, we've had a program in the past that was sidewalk matching money for low-income folks. And we had no clue how much we would need. But we didn't codify how much should go in there. I think we can only estimate. And it would have to come through the process. If planning and social services see that next year there may be a problem, then they're going to need to ask for more.
So can we in this ordinance then state be funded for $50,000 for the first?
I'm sorry.
Can we in this ordinance state be funded for $50,000 for the initial?
I think that's up to the committee, isn't it?
I think we could, if we approve this ordinance, which I think we will, because it's a good ordinance, we could make a recommendation to the council that they include a budget amendment to fund it for X number of dollars for the 8 months left in this fiscal year. And it would not put it into the books then, it would be done every year. It would go on year by year. But it wouldn't, I'd say, I wouldn't leave it in the ordinance to stand. It could be done either way, I think, but I think it'd be better to recommend to the council a budget amendment to fund this program for the rest of the fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. And Cheryl, how do you feel about that from your division with it just stating for $50,000 for the first time and with no mention of accrual? Do you have discomfort with that?
Again, I just think everybody just needs to recognize that because we haven't been here before, and just knowing that something could come up and that we'll be back asking for additional monies if that's the way it's gonna go. And we'll come back with numbers. I think that's the other issue, is that we don't have any data at this point to support it, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Crosby's on the list and has not spoken yet. For those of you who are before her, would you allow her to go next? Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Crosby.
Just back to what Councilmember James was stating, and I appreciate the fact that we're going to pass an ordinance, it appears, to outline the guidelines of this program, which brings me to the question I'd asked last time, is whether or not we needed an ordinance, because the reason why I'd asked that question was because I felt like this could have been it was my understanding that we don't necessarily need the ordinance to make this a part of the budgeting process. I was told, I believe, that yes, you did have to have the ordinance to run the program. I've since found out that you probably could have requested in the budgeting process for this, which brings me to the point that at any given time, you could have requested this as part of the budget. For now, we could have had this as part of the budget. No, yes. But we saw a need within the community already, and we could have gone ahead and requested the funds. So I appreciate that we're outlining this fact in ordinance, but I agree with the fact also that we don't need to necessarily appropriate $50,000 every year and bind ourselves down with that. So I will support removing that language, but I would also be willing to look at providing some seed money and also look at future budgeting opportunities with this.
All right, Vice Mayor Gray.
I'd like to say just a little bit of observation or context that this is one of those conversations, and where not just conversation, but the work of the council, the work of this work team, as Councilmember James said, the push toward change and innovation. Sometimes it's a struggle. Councilmember McCord, you're nodding your head, but if we really reflect on it, this is where often the hard work gets done and the constructive work gets done, and even some compromises are made. But the good news about this is that we've all seen this need. It's illustrated itself in the past couple of years. There have been a large community of constituents who are advocates for this intervention and this support, and I, like others, are glad to support it. Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilmember Blues.
Just very briefly, Madam Chair, I do expect that while we cannot always accurately predict how much money will be required for a particular program, we can't do that in an ordinance, and we can't make those kinds of insurances. I do say again that I would expect that, given this ordinance as a context, as a guideline, Social Services Department will be powerful advocates for adequate funding of it year to year, and so will many members of this council going forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Beard.
One last comment. I've had my turn 4 times now, so I promise this is the last. I just want to remind everybody, the third line of Section 5-107 says it is recommended. And that's all it is. It is recommended that we appropriate at least $50,000 annually to the program. And maybe we could change any funds appropriated to the program should rather than shall remain available, which would soften that ongoing question. But in any case, it is only a recommendation. And with that recommendation and with the uncharted waters we're in, you know, the $50,000 that Vice Mayor Gray mentioned is obviously better than none, but we can't react quickly enough, I don't think, as a council if we actually have a fire and we use up all the $50,000 and then some to reappropriate. It will take some time. And meanwhile, these folks are sitting in motels, and I assume I guess we're paying for the motels. I don't know what we're doing, but we can't react in any reasonable amount of time to be able to help these folks during that interim. Thank you.
Dr. Stevens.
I would support the amendment as stated, and I would also say that if this amendment passes, then I would make a motion that we approve the ordinance as amended, and also a motion that we request the council to make a budget amendment to adequately fund this for the rest of the fiscal year. And and I think that's where we would need your help, Cheryl, to find out exactly how much money you think you need for the rest of the year.
I think we've said, did we say, did I hear the $50,000 to start out?
Then I would make a motion for $50,000 as a budget amendment. No, I'm not amending, I'm saying I support Councilman Blue's amendment, and I would make a motion then if that passes, that we approve the ordinance as amended and recommend to the council it be passed, and that we also request that a budget amendment be done for $50,000 for the rest of the fiscal year to this newly created program.
Vice Mayor Gray.
This is a quick question, or maybe a clarification. Just in terms of process and administrative process, if we adopted the model that Dr. Stevens has just suggested, or the process that Dr. Stevens has just suggested, Cheryl, perhaps a good tracking system, for the next 8 months that could give us a heads up pretty quickly on what it's looking like. So you might be able to get good data in the first 3 months, then you could come back to us and share that with us and give us some kind of pro forma going forward to give us a good index or indicator of what it is looking like going forward.
We can do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Are there other comments on the motion? Okay, the motion on the floor is to amend Section 5-107 to remove the phrase, "It is recommended that the LFUCG appropriate at least $50,000 annually to the program." So the motion is to approve this ordinance with that amendment. Keith, did I?
No, I think the motion
No.
is on the amendment.
Oh, just to, okay, gotcha.
And
It's
then
just on
after
the
that is
amendment.
passed.
It is my
Yes.
understanding we were going to remove after viable and is regularly funded. It is recommended that the LFUCG appropriate at least $50,000 annually to the program.
What was, Councilmember Blues, you made the motion.
You're going to put a comma after viable?
That's correct.
Okay.
And delete the rest of the sentence and pick up then with the next clause, any funds.
So your
Et cetera.
motion does not include "and is regularly funded." Is that correct?
He wants that deleted.
That's right. That is correct.
Okay, so the motion is to remove "and is regularly funded." It is recommended that the LFUCG appropriate at least $50,000 annually to the program. So it would read, "In order to ensure that the relocation assistance program for tenants remains viable, any funds appropriated to the program shall remain available to the program in subsequent fiscal years." Is that correct? Okay. All right. Any other comment on the motion? Councilmember James.
I just want to say that I am going to vote in favor of this motion and rely very strongly on social services to be very, very active with coming to the mic or speaking with council members or speaking with your commissioner to let us know how it's working, because we have the ability to go in and change this if the facts justify that. But since it's new, I will support and vote with my colleague, Councilmember Blues, on his motion. But I'm really relying on extreme feedback. I don't want this to be one of those ordinances that sits on the shelf somewhere that nobody ever looks at ever again, and then the money starts to dwindle in the budget year after year after year. So please, let's work together to make sure that we do that. Thank you.
Okay. Will all those in favor of the motion please say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have one, Councilmember Beard, one nay, and so that motion passes. Now, do we hear a motion, Dr. Stevens, for the...
I move that the Planning Committee recommend to the full council the adoption of this ordinance as amended.
Do I hear a second? I have several seconds. Is there discussion on the motion to recommend this ordinance to the full council for passage? Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
I have another motion.
Dr. Stevens has another motion.
And I would move that we also recommend to the full council that appropriate funding starting at $50,000 for the remainder of the fiscal year be appropriated, funds permitting, for this program.
Okay, and we have several seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, so this will also come with the recommendation that the council allocate $50,000 from the fund balance, basically, to get the program going. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
All of you. Thank you, Councilmember James, and all the task force members. We'll move right along here to our second item. Andrew Grunwald could not be here. And so I can ask, yes, let's have Paul Schoniger just highlight what his report would have been on the Newtown Pike status.
This is found on page 4, and I don't want to read to you, but I guess I'm going to. Under Phase 1, the temporary housing in the South End Park, the temporary housing area is almost complete. The construction is almost complete, and move-in is scheduled by Thanksgiving. Regarding Phase 4, and this is the road, actually, from Maine to Versailles, the right-of-way has, negotiations have begun with District 7, and that they had a meeting with stakeholders for the design of the bridge over Town Branch. And regarding the land trust, that the Land Trust Board of Directors had been established, and that the second meeting is scheduled for later this month, tomorrow, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much. We have for written information only Liberty Road status and Loudon Avenue Road status. Pardon me? Councilmember Blues, did you have a question? Oh, that was left over from another. Did you have a question about Newtown Pike?
I just wanted to add a couple of things on that. The temporary housing is in place, and there are some final touches to do. And a few weeks ago, the folks who are going to move in and several others of us toured that housing, got to see inside the manufactured homes, and they're really quite commodious and quite substantial and very impressive. Everybody was extremely pleased with this temporary housing, which is, it's going to be only semi-temporary, since folks are going to be in there from 1.5 to 2 years. I've also sat in on several meetings on the bridge over Town Branch, and there was a lot of citizen input and input from area architects and Van Meter Pettit from the Town Branch Association, and it was really impressive to see this kind of discussion, cooperation, and coming up with under financial constraints, the design of a bridge that is going to be impressive and not just another road over another creek. The Community Land Trust has met for the first time. Paula, one correction: tomorrow night's meeting has been canceled, and the next meeting, I can't remember the date, is in November, but it's been penciled in for 4 hours. So we have our work ahead of us on the Land Trust Board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that addition to the update. Vice Mayor Gray, did you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Back to the Newtown Pike presentation. We're going to meet, are we meeting next month? We are meeting next month, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay, before break, right? Okay. I don't know, I guess you've got a full schedule already, but I sure think that it would be useful to have a presentation by Public Works, by, I guess, project manager, by Andrew, on the current status of Newtown that confirms what we're hearing today on these really critical issues, the bridge, whether or not the bridge is being incorporated, these suggestions are being incorporated, the extent to which the intersection of Manchester and Newtown is going to be a pedestrian inviting one and streetscape inviting one. That's a big issue, still a big issue. I think there's a lot of anxiety over that. I don't know that it's really been confirmed yet. Maybe you know something that I don't, Tom, or I've not kept up with it that closely. I just know that the anxiety among those who are really interested in it, the stakeholders, is pretty high.
Well, I think we're all stakeholders in.
Yeah, all of us, right? Those who are, I guess, the ones who are, have property contiguous to it, the distillery district. That's just what I've picked up. So I'm expressing it now because if the project is going to full design and and to bid, then it can be too late. And
Would it suit you to have, we have 7 other issues on November's docket, but we could have a brief update from Andrew, which would address...
or even an interim meeting, with anybody who wants to join it. I think it'd be probably useful.
For an update on Newtown Pike Extension.
Bridge
Status.
designs and intersection designs are not casual, and we've only got one shot at this.
Would it suit the committee, would you want to ask our council administrator to set up a workshop? Or what suits
It's good
you?
with me. Yeah, I just
To
think
have
it'd be useful
an
to have a
update?
little update on it, a little bit more detail.
How do others feel about that?
Well, I think that's a good idea, and why don't we, I know that our, well, I was going to say we could have an update at our next planning committee, if, say, for 10, 15 minutes. Do you think that would work? And perhaps even so, I haven't, you know the upcoming agenda better than I do, but maybe there's something of lesser import that we could make a change.
I would say we have our development plan adherence coming back. I'm hoping the land bank, social services report, electrical inspector fee is coming back, and all of those issues on zoning violations are coming back. So we could have a short Newtown Pike update. And then if council members wanted an extensive vetting, well, and Dr. Stevens says we may get student housing. So we have a pretty packed agenda.
I think, Madam Chairman, that a meeting at a work session at noon someday would be an excellent way to handle this.
A workshop.
A workshop, yeah.
Invite all council members. Okay. I'll work with the council administrator toward that. And Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess my concern maybe is similar to Vice Mayor Gray's. Paul, maybe you know the answer to this. The intersection of Newtown Pike and Manchester Street is obviously within the TIF district. Is the bridge also in the TIF district?
I believe so, but it's not one of the identified projects. But you folks can change that.
Well, I'm just thinking if in fact the choice is between some plain mud fence type of bridge versus something a bit more decorative that might enhance what else is going on, that the funds would be available through that route to add to the other funds to get that done.
I think that would be an appropriate expenditure of funds in the district.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the management audit, which the information starts on page 6 of your packet. And I will, there's implementation status, and then there is the factual errors exercise. And I will first of all ask Dr. Stevens, who put this into committee, what his thoughts are on moving forward.
Thank you. When I referred this to the committee in May, there were several hot buttons going at that time, and 6 months has passed, and I'm sure the tincture of time has been able to resolve some of these issues. And what I would be most concerned about is the status related to the letters which Mr. Schoenecker received from various components of our government, which thought that the management audit was not accurate and didn't agree with their recommendations. So I would, if somebody here representing the management, I mean, the administration can answer those questions, that would satisfy me.
Okay. Do other council members have a different view on how you want to work through this? We have quite a number of pages. The information Dr. Stevens was referring to starts on page 55 of the packet, and we do have some administration folks here who perhaps could attend to some of these questions. Councilmember Crosby.
I don't know if it's appropriate, if maybe, were these people informed that today we would be discussing, so these
Yes.
people on here, or administration, or the directors? Both, okay.
Divisions, it's my understanding, division directors and administration knew that we were discussing these.
So the commissioners are here representing the directors?
Who are you representing, Joe Kelly?
I guess that's my question, is are you all here to respond on behalf of the directors on the management audit?
We asked the commissioners to be here, to be available to respond to whatever questions you might have. The commissioners have talked with the directors to get a complete understanding of what the directors' thinking was relative to the responses, and they're here to be able to address whatever questions you might have.
So rather than send the directors, the commissioners were just briefed on?
Well, you have the director's comments in the packet.
I'm just asking.
I'm just responding.
Thank you.
Directors were notified by Mr. Schoniger about the meeting and the discussion.
I understand, but my
invited
question was,
to attend.
but what I'm being told is that they were briefed and the commissioners are here representing the directors instead of them being here. Thank you.
So, did you want to add something?
No.
Okay, all right. I thought maybe you were getting ready to add something. Well, then if no one objects, we'll go ahead and follow through with Dr. Stevens' request. And if you can turn to page 55 in your packet, this first, I think we'll just move through these. Might be the best way to do this. This first letter was from Richard Murray of Fleet Services. And I'll let you get oriented. Yes.
I would ask that the commissioners who are over those departments come forward and they can respond to the specific, if there are questions. You know, if there are no questions, but they are here. That's why they're here, is to try to respond if there are questions.
How about, commissioners, would you be willing to all come forward so that it makes it a little easier for council members to ask questions? We don't want to have to drag you down. I'm asking Paul to give me a little assistance here as we move through these.
Councilmember Gorton and I were discussing, it might be useful, I mean, for example, in this comment from Richard Murray, he's questioning recommendation H24, which is reclassification of an individual in his department. If you look through the implementation status, H24, the administration in Kimra, correct me if I'm wrong, H24, the administration still agrees with, but it's in a holding status as opposed to being implemented.
And can you explain why that is? I think that's all council members are wanting, is to know why are these the way they are in the status and when they were brought forward as concerns. Thank you for being here.
Yes, I'd be glad to. At this point, both of those positions are filled. If we were to make that change, it would involve eliminating a position and recreating a different position. So we've chosen not to make that move at this time. Should anything in the department change, we might, we'll take a look at that recommendation and see if it makes sense at that time.
And council members, if you have questions along the way, push your button. Thank you. Any questions about that? Councilmember Beard.
Mr. Cole, this does not relate directly to that portion Dr. Stevens referenced, but I'm just curious about the sale of the automobiles, the fleet sales that we went through, and whether we received what was estimated by management partners that we would receive from the sale?
I'm not sure that all of them have been sold. I know that at least 95% have been sold. I haven't seen a final report, and the estimate of the receipts before our expenses was close to $500,000, so we actually exceeded the amount that was estimated in the budget.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to have Paul just roll us through here.
The second identification of factual errors came from the Citizens Advocate, I believe. And that deals with F8. And if I understand the implementation status, while the council continued to fund that position and did not eliminate it during the budget process, the administration still agrees with the recommendation of the elimination of the position, and it appears like you'll recommend that, or the intention, I think from the note on the status, is that you'll probably resubmit that as part of the FY10 budget, I believe.
So Joe, does that mean that for the fiscal year 10 budget, the administration will submit to eliminate the Citizens Advocate position?
That is our position at this moment, that we will renew that recommendation as part of the budget process.
So that would show up as a non-funded position in the budget? Is that how that will come forward?
Just as we did this 09 budget presentation.
Do council members have any questions about that? Councilmember Beard.
That's okay. We have a work group presently working on that whole situation of the Citizens Advocate, and it's been fairly crisply determined that the Citizens Advocate office reports to the council, does not report to the administration. So how are you all going to be able to replicate what you did as far as your recommendations in the budget? It really should be an extension of our budget, should it not?
Well, I think previously that budget item has been a part of the mayor's.
Oh, I think I know you're right, but
and so
that's just an old error that has replicated itself. Let's put it that way.
Well, we would go ahead and include it, and it's the council's prerogative to do as the council wills, and so.
I just hate to see us do double work.
It won't require much effort on our part.
Nor will it for us, I guess. Thank you.
I hear you.
Councilmember Crosby, are you on the list? Beard is finished. Okay.
Okay. So are you, I guess my question is, are you, based on your budget recommendation to remove this, are you removing it based on the audit, on the recommendation of the management audit?
We still concur with the recommendation of the management audit. And we believe that the work of the Citizens Advocate can be accomplished through other means that are in existence.
Have you all, do you concur with any of the work that or any of the input that they've provided regarding their beliefs that some of the input that they got from the people performing the audit, they do not agree with the people who perform the audit, and that's not changed your opinion at all?
It is not.
And what about the working group that some of us will you be taking those opinions into consideration from the working group of the council prior to budget? I mean, I guess it sounds like is you've already made the decision to make a recommendation for the next fiscal year, but you haven't gotten any recommendations from our working group either.
As I said, it's our position today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Myers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just want to express my concern because the Citizens Advocate is a part of our budget. It's a part of our office. And to me, when you say you're going to send a budget to us that doesn't include that in there for funding, it's the same thing as saying you're going to send us a budget without funding for our council aides. So I think that if that's the intent, then there'll be a move from the council to send the budget back to the mayor saying start over.
Well, you make adjustments to the budget generally each budget cycle, and that's always been the case. And so I think to say that the administration should not submit something that they think is appropriate for your consideration it is not done in disrespect. It's simply that our opinion might differ in this particular instance, and in other instances it often does. And so then if you reject our recommendation, then we understand that.
Well, again, I disagree with you because this is a part of our council office. So basically what you're telling us is a branch of our piece of the government, you just determined that we don't need it any longer. And that is paramount to saying the same as you don't think we need our council aides any longer as well.
I'm sorry, that would be an incorrect assumption if you thought that, and I apologize if you were left with that impression, but that's two different, from our perspective, two different issues.
If you look at the org chart, the Citizens Advocate sits underneath the council office. It's not sitting under the administration. So if you determine that you can just take a part of the council office and just unfund it, pick and choose which part of the council office you want to unfund. It's the same thing as taking our aides and saying, you don't think we need those any longer either. And we disagree on this. We don't need to keep going back and forth. But the fact is, that's a part of our budget. It's under the council office and the org chart. It's also in the charter. So the difficulty that it sets up is the same one we had last year. You know, part of this administration's MO has been to just defund things that it doesn't want to do. When you do that, what it creates is a problem where the council then has to go back and cut out other things to put things that, for example, the charter says have to be funded back into the budget. That's the other difficulty. Our feelings aren't hurt. That's fine. You guys can do whatever you want to do. But it's a part of the charter. It's a part of our office. It's going to be funded. So if you do it that way, then there's going to be something else that the administration wants, and maybe we'll just take out all the advisors and cut those.
That may be your prerogative.
Well,
I would recommend to the administration that you don't send us a budget that's cut out part of our office.
Councilmember Beard.
Thank you. Further, Joe, we've worked somewhat diligently with the council administrators, the Citizens Advocate's office, and have put in more accountability, I guess. Some of the things that we didn't have in the past, as far as which we'll be bringing to the council in total, but we're well on our way to being able to do that. And it's not the same ball game that you're making your judgments on, or administration's making their judgments on. It's a totally different ball game, and it's got a lot of accountability and communications that did not exist before. So to sit here today and make that judgment when you're going to see what all that is soon anyway is probably a kind of a moot point at this juncture anyway.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you.
Are there other comments from council members? I think this just serves as a heads up, right? as to what the administration is thinking about this. If there are no others, I'll ask Paul to go ahead with the next one.
The next section is planning, and the first three errors, or the first three areas of disagreements revolve application process, and that's J48, J49, and J50. And then the second part of the discussion involves the consolidation of two divisions within, two sections within planning, strategic planning and long-range planning. And the note on the status is that they administration recognized that the council disagreed with the recommendation and funded that position. But I believe, similar to the Citizens Advocate, I think the intention is, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the intention is that they would come back in FY10 with a similar recommendation, I believe. But Mr. Webb might want to respond to any part of that.
Mr. Webb, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you have some comments on this?
Actually, what I prepared for, just got back from vacation, prepared for was just addressing the memo that was sent. And if you go right through the memo, the first error on page 173, I believe, has to do with a view of what is administrative support and what is not. And the management partners identified some job classifications as administrative support where they're not, where planning does not view those as administrative support. An administrative officer, which was formerly titled the Deputy of Planning Service Sections, which is a fill-in position, a high-level fill-in position to keep the different processes moving. Also, some technical positions that were viewed as administrative support, which have low-level planning duties, and that was what was identified as an error, was the count. And if you look at the administrative positions that are actually there today, which is one fewer than whenever Management Partners was there, there are 3 administrative support positions for planning services. There is administrative support in a transportation area, which is grant funded through the MPO, and there is 1 administrative support person in long-range planning. Are there any questions about that?
Council members, do you have questions?
Okay, and on page 175, major subdivisions and zoning review process. It's a complicated process, and there are some areas there that were identified as not correct by the planning group. Number one, the first, that the management partner states that for plans, the cycle time between the subcommittee meeting and the full planning commission ranges from 1 to 3 weeks. The fact is that those are precisely set, and that it's one week, except when it is accompanied by a zone change. It can be longer. Okay.
Any questions on that? All right.
The next section deals with Dean. I'm sorry, unless.
Well, did you have any other points to make on the development review process or any of the?
In the management partners report, it states that there are 3 hearings that take place. There aren't actually 3 hearings. There is only 1 official hearing, and that is hearing as advertised. Whenever you use the term hearing, you are thinking about an advertised hearing, an official type hearing. There's only 1 of those, and that's in front of the full planning board. But there are there's a review committee, and then there's a subcommittee of the Planning Commission that reviews plans prior to that official hearing.
So do you know, Mike, and you may not because...
I'm pretty early in the process.
Yes. Do you think that the management partners didn't really understand the process and what is a true hearing and what is not? I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
I really don't think that I'm because I wasn't
you were
involved
not.
in the interview process. I wouldn't want to answer that question, and that would be an assumption on my part.
And I don't think there's anybody else here who, is there anyone else here who wants to take a stab at that? No one. Okay.
And it may just be a problem with use of terms, that there are two reviews and then a formal hearing.
Mm-hmm.
But the first two are not a formal hearing, and when you use that term hearing, it qualifies a certain type.
Councilmember Crosby.
With all due respect, I'm not sure what this exercise is accomplishing by going through page by page. I think that when we requested this from our division directors, we were doing so because we had heard that there were areas that had a lot of concern about some of the facts that as they were laid out from the management audit, and I believe now we have that information in front of us. And quite frankly, I'm a little disappointed that the people who actually wrote the reports aren't here for us to be able to question directly as how they relate to the implementation. So I don't believe that us going through page by page is really accomplishing much here. I think the whole, obviously I was part of the request to get this, and I think the whole purpose of it was for us to get the information, and now for us to figure out what do we want to do with the information versus going through with the administration page by page. We have it in front of us. Clearly, I think the most disappointing thing is we clearly see that we paid a lot of money for something, and there are clearly errors within that. So I think now either, and it's not something we have to do today, but we as a group have to decide what we want to do with this information. And it may just be when we get those recommendations, like we saw on the pages before, that clearly we understand that there are factual errors as outlined by our divisional directors. And, for example, with the Citizens Advocate's Office or with planning or whatever, fire, whatever division that is, that maybe we need to take those points into consideration when we're making decisions on what changes they want to make. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilmember James.
Somewhat related, I would just want to make sure that the administration is still marking within our work session packets those that are management audit recommendations. I haven't noticed it in the past couple, but I did miss one work session, so maybe there just aren't any on this particular one, but just wanted to put a heads up while we're talking about it. Thank you.
And is that the truth and nothing but the truth? The commissioners are all, and do you want to say something at the mic, please, for the folks at home?
Councilmember James, that's correct, but also consent decree matters are being highlighted as well.
So they're all still being noted on new business. Okay. Council members, what is your pleasure? Do you want to continue, or do you want to not? Yes, Councilmember Beard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Joe, if you don't mind, have you presented these errors to management partners to get their reaction?
Risk management and the fire ones were shared with management partners.
Okay, the rest the administration did not agree with, or is it just?
Well, I think what we found was that some of the responses included philosophical differences as opposed to errors, if you will. Those things that are clearly perhaps errors of information or assumptions, we acknowledge those, and they be reflected in the implementation process. So, as you know, there was a significant amount of discussion concerning the fire information, so we did share that with management partners.
but philosophical differences, should they not have been resolved so that everybody's on the same page before they write a report?
Well, I think we've had those discussions with the directors on the philosophical issues.
How about with management partners on the philosophical issues? Because you can't get anywhere if this entity over here believes it one way and this entity over here believes it another way, and they're both right, or they're both wrong, or they're what? I don't.
Well, I think from the management partners report was pretty straightforward, and those things that the administration and the council working together think are appropriate and things that should be implemented, we're trying to move forward with those. Those things that there are concerns about or reluctance about, the council has expressed to us their concerns about those, and we've taken that into consideration relative to how we go forward with implementation. We think that if you take the 424 recommendations, probably 90% of them are, or maybe more, are not controversial in nature and generally make sense, I think, to most everyone. Does everyone like all those recommendations? Of course not. There are some in there that I don't personally like, but I think there are things that we should probably do. Nevertheless, at
least we're going through the process of investigating and such, and if 90% are right, then we only need to ask them to refund the 10%. Is that?
Well, because we don't agree doesn't necessarily make them wrong.
No, I understand.
So, I think that's...
But as long as they want to continue in the consulting business without getting a bad rep from us is probably the only real big stick we have.
Well, I would, I couldn't raise my hand if you asked for a show of hands of anybody who's going to write 100% of the time.
I understand that, too.
So
I'm just prodding a little bit.
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I don't think we'd have any hands up on that one. Councilmember, Vice Mayor Gray has a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess for me, one of the comments that I'd like to make really is context. When this council was elected and when this administration was elected, and we came together to create the 6 pillars, one of which was to improve efficiencies and effectiveness in government, and one of the tactics associated with that was to create or to get some outside counsel, which would provide us with some benchmarks, if you will, and my fear is that the silos and the rigidity of our government, the painfulness often of it, as it relates to their constituents, the customer friendliness of our government as it relates to our citizens and the voters and our constituents, we may be missing the big picture, which is that's what this was designed to accomplish. And as we dig into the weeds, if we don't lift up to the treetops, we're going to miss some of that. When I read, for example, the response of planning to the recommendation on page 176 to improve the development review process, it's pretty much just the same. It's deja vu all over again. It is enforcing and defending the current condition, which is not moving us forward, which leads to the sclerosis and the calcification of government that all of our citizens are just worn out with. So, I realize that we have pushback on some of these recommendations. I do myself, but thematically, I really hope that we will reinforce the need to do things differently. I heard just the other day there was a recommendation to go online with some of our processes in the Board of Architectural Review so that our citizens could see how to do it, how to get through it without all the pain. Now, that's not rocket surgery. So as we go through this, I realize that was a mixed metaphor. That was intentional. But, you know, let's remember what we're here for. And we're here to try to get things done that other agencies or other private sector can't get done for our citizens. And so, you know, getting some of this through is still really, really important. And for us to work together with the administration to do that is really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have another comment? You hurried up there to the post. Well, I want to get a sense of what the council wants to be doing here. Since there was some expression of distress at the process here, and what the end result would be.
Maybe
Yes.
a suggestion, you know, that you know, often things are painful before there's progress. So maybe there's a way that we could do a working group or something. Councilmember Crosby's nodding her head, with the administration to examine some of these issues that may be particularly sensitive ones, and the ones that the administration thinks that they're picking off and addressing. But where we actually, you know, maybe if there are any rocks in the road, we remove them or work toward removing them is what I'm suggesting. And maybe a work team of anybody who's willing to do that, you know.
To look through
Yeah,
these.
to look through it, work with, you know, Joe or whoever he might assign to it.
And perhaps that work team could come back to this committee.
To the committee, yeah.
Yes, Councilmember Crosby.
I would also suggest that maybe these directors that they would be involved, since they're the ones who actually wrote it, perhaps?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Councilmember Stinnett.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I guess, question of logistics in trying to do something like that. How many of these factual errors that we've identified here do you all plan on implementing? All of them? None of them? Some of them? Do we even know that yet?
That's the question.
I mean, have you all even had a chance to look at them?
If it is in fact a factual error, then, and if it has a material effect on the recommendation, then obviously we want to take that into consideration and make an appropriate adjustment. Again, I think a lot of what is being reflected, and you've had the opportunity to read them, a lot of it is a philosophical difference. If there is a confusion over a term, hearing versus whatever, then that's a semantic thing that we can get worked out.
Well, I guess my point is, my question is that you're going to bring some of these to us anyway in the future that you may or not want to implement. And the ones that you have no desire to implement, can we pick those out? Because otherwise, why do we need to have a discussion about if you have no intentions at all of ever going through it? That's what I'm getting to. I mean, if you all identified the ones in the future you plan on bringing us, I think we see them anyway through the new business items. They're identified, and if we agree with them, then we can discuss it as a group.
They are, and the proposed action is reflected in the update report that you have in the packet, you know.
I think the proposed actions are more important right now at this point.
What I heard you say, though, I think, and maybe not, is on the proposed actions, have these factual errors been taken into account? Do we know how many of these errors that were reported by division directors are actually having a follow-up, or are they being implemented anyway? You wanted a link between the two, it sounded like.
Yeah, I don't want to go through every error if you have no business.
Sure.
Yes.
If it is a factual error, if it indeed is a factual error, then we would not bring something to you that was based upon that factual error. That would make no sense, and we would not do that. If it's something that is, again, is a semantical kind of thing, then we will rectify that and take that into consideration before we would bring anything to you. It is not our intent to move forward with a recommendation that contains an error. We certainly would not want to do that. So, and as they come to you, they'll be noted as management audit items. So you'll have another opportunity at work session or during council meetings to ask us about those as they come forward.
Well, if you can create the link between any of these errors and your implementation of those and give us a heads up.
We can do that.
That's obviously appreciated.
Yes,
But I think the point is, by going back and correcting errors that you have no business on implementing, doesn't change the report. The report is what it is. We're not going to go back and rewrite it.
That's
Can't
a
do
very
that.
good point.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and I think that the work group, which was suggested from this end of the horseshoe, might be a small 2 or 3 council members who might sit down with you and division directors and link those, is what I'm hearing, is that council members want to link between what was perceived as an error by division directors and what's being done in the action column.
Yeah.
Is it on hold, and directly linked, as opposed to, we really appreciate, I think, that the status is here, and we see all the status. Which ones actually had reported error, and how was that taken into consideration? Does that reflect what I'm hearing? And so do I have any work group folks who might be willing to sit down and do that? Councilmember Beard? No?
No,
You're not
most
volunteering?
definitely yes, but
Okay, good.
But I guess it makes sense, would it not, if the existing links that worked on the budget last year would go to their respective areas to discuss these with them, because they already have had discussions concerning the budget, and many of the implementation, the budget had been impacted by or was going to be impacted by the recommendations that those links be reactivated to do this job.
Committee members, what do you think? Do you want a work group, or do you want links to do this? It might be, yes, Councilmember James.
If we had a particular report out date for the links, it's difficult to get folks together to have those discussions and to continue to have the links meetings when it's not budget time. So if we had a report out date, that might be helpful.
It's easier to do during budget time. I mean, it's easier to do now rather than budget time, I would find.
Councilmember Blues.
I suggest that the work group would be most efficient as a small group, and could come back to the links chairs for information, advice, and recapitulation as might be needed.
A small
Let's do
work
it
group
that
might be a quicker, more efficient way to do it. Yes, Vice Mayor.
I'm sort of just footnoting on what Councilmember Stinnett had to say in terms of the homework that might get this moving faster. The main interest that I would have is that we're not 2 years into this, and then we find out that, well, the council held this up, and so right now, or anybody held up what was perceived to be, or you believed that was important to achieve. So maybe just an update on this that says we're not doing anything because we've been stopped, or there's a red light on it, or everything's a green light. Would get.
Is
that?
I'm
not translating that accurate, or that's just my perception. Is we want to know what it is has been green lighted, or where there's a red light, or caution light. Even.
I think there was, if I remember correctly, we've discussed this so many times, several times, and we had a work session over third floor of the Phoenix. I think we management partners came in, and we spent the better part of a day, I believe, going through item by item. And Madam Chair, I believe you chaired that meeting, but you did a good job. It was a long day, and went through the recommendations kind of one by one. there's a bit of confusion on our part about what is it that you're absolutely not going to let us go forward with. And so if you can tell us what it is you absolutely don't want us to go forward with, that means you're okay with us going forward with everything else, then we can be going forward with everything else. We're kind of, we're a bit confused too, and I know y'all are, and we've probably contributed to that. I accept responsibility for that. So I think we all want the same thing. We're just struggling a little bit, and there's a fear that we'll make a mistake, I think, on the part of folks.
Councilmember Crosby.
I would just say, Vice Mayor, I don't think we're holding up many things in the audit because, as indicated earlier, we passed several things with the work session. They indicate it's a management audit item, and we go on and we pass it, and there's many things that we have already implemented. So I don't think we're holding up any process at all. A lot of things we have passed based on recommendations of management partners. So I think for anybody to insinuate that we're holding up any type of process based on this study, we're not. There are just certain things in here that I think we're questioning, as we should with anything that we have questions on. And there are some things we are moving forward on, and I think it's okay that we question a few of these things. And I would be in favor of a small working group made up of a few council members from the Planning Committee as well as the other people involved. Thank you.
Is that a motion?
So moved.
Do I hear a second? The motion is to create a small working group. Are you thinking 2 or 3 people to work with Joe Kelly and the division directors?
You want 3? 3.
3 people to go through and link the error part with the action part and the progress and what is actually being done with each of those. Is that your motion?
Yes.
Okay. Is there discussion on the motion? Now, if we pass this motion, we'll need 3 people who will step forward. So we'll take a vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? No. We did have 2 volunteers, I believe, Councilmember Crosby and Councilmember Beard. Is that correct? And is there one more person who would be willing to sit on that from the committee?
I will,
Vice Mayor.
but I'd also, just suggest that this is one of those where anyone who would be able to participate and willing to would be welcome. I would
Yes,
say.
of course.
Right.
It would
Yep.
be an open meeting.
Right.
And if at all possible, perhaps you could report back to us in November, if at all possible.
Is that good? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank all of you who came. And do I hear a motion to adjourn? All those in favor, please rise.